Freddy Krueger was inspired by real events, and I want to warn you, they are tragic. The year is 1981. Daniel was a teenager living in Merced, California. His family had just fled to the United States a few years ago after the Laotian Civil War ended to escape the eradication of their people, the Hmong, by the Pathet Lao. Ever since arriving in the US, life had been alright for Daniel. His family resided in a Hmong community, so he was still able to enjoy his own culture while he adapted to new American customs, and his dad, who is a physician, provided his family with a safe and comfortable home life. No one, not his friends, family, neighbors, or doctors, could have known that Daniel's life was about to come to a tragic end, and under circumstances that still baffle the medical community to this day. The story goes that Daniel began expressing to his family that he was scared to go to sleep. Well, scared isn't the right word. He was terrified. He seemed to think that someone or something was going to attack him if he fell asleep, and he resorted to some extreme measures to stay awake. He was taking caffeine pills, making coffee in his bedroom closet, and weaseling out of every one of his father's attempts to intervene. Then, on one fateful evening, Daniel's father woke up to a gut-wrenching sound that he would never forget. Could never forget. His son's screams. His wife and their children rushed into Daniel's bedroom, but it was already too late. Daniel had passed away. What made this loss even more painful, though, was not even an autopsy could explain how it happened. By all accounts, Daniel was a healthy teenager. Was the trauma of the war and culture shock of moving to the US more than his system could handle? Or was the true cause beyond human comprehension? Something supernatural. Now, as unbelievable as that story may sound, Daniel was not the only person to die under these mysterious circumstances. In fact, this same affliction, called sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, or SUNS, killed over 100 other Hmong men after they emigrated to the United States in the late 70s and early 80s, and the doctors could not understand why. I mean, dying in your sleep is probably one of the best ways to go, if you're like 90, but the afflicted were young and healthy with no red flags in their medical history. As a result, health experts were open to entertaining any and all theories regarding the cause. One such theory that circulated in newspapers from Los Angeles to New York was nightmare-induced cardiac arrest. In other words, these men had imagined something so terrifying that their hearts gave out. And according to Wes Craven, it was this report from the LA Times about the young Hmong man dying in his sleep that gave him a stroke of inspiration. Sorry, that was fucked up. Craven, who had been fascinated by dreams for decades, wondered if the nightmare theory was true. What if there was an evil entity that not only lived in the dream world, but controlled it and terrorized us with our deepest fears? It was in that moment that he knew he had the perfect plot for a horror movie, and a first-of-his-kind villain was born. Yeah, it's dark, but maybe not quite as disturbing as being the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Even if you've never seen a single Nightmare on Elm Street movie, I would not be surprised if you still knew the basics of Freddy Krueger. The character is so popular, he's transcended his original medium of horror movies and made appearances or been referenced in plenty of other places. If I were going to describe him really simply, I'd say he's a demonic burn victim who dresses like a colorblind scarecrow and haunts his victims' dreams with a scary claw hand. But that analysis is superficial, only skin deep, some might say. Because when I mentioned that Freddy was the first of his kind, I wasn't just playing hype man. A Nightmare on Elm Street was the first film to depict a person or thing actually inhabiting the dream world and manipulating dreams to bring about real-world consequences. Prior to this, we'd seen depictions of nightmares and even the divine manipulating reality. I'm looking at you, It's a Wonderful Life, but nothing like Freddy. At least, not in film. I cannot say the same about folklore and mythology though, depending on how far in the series you go.
Sorry, kid. I don't believe in fairy tales.
Freddy's lore gets significantly more complex and meta as the movies go on, but at the fundamental level, he has a lot in common with other freaky figures that humans across time and around the world tell tales about being terrorized by at night. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole just yet.
Welcome to Wonderland, Alice.
First, you've got to hear how Freddy's fathers created him, because Wes Craven and Robert Englund put way more thought into his design and portrayal than most people realize. So at this point, Freddy Krueger is still just a vague, nameless construct in Wes Craven's mind. An abstract idea that still needed to be fleshed out, and then have his flesh burned off. The writer-director used one of my favorite words when talking about his approach to designing Freddy, and that word is archetype. If you've watched Messed Up Origins since the early days, then you know that I love me some archetypes, largely because of what they symbolize. For those new to the concept, an archetype is a pattern or symbol or kind of behavior that is found across cultures and time periods. Archetypes go beyond the lived experience of the individual and represent experiences or traits that are fundamental to all humans. In other words, archetypes emphasize our similarities rather than our differences. So what all this means is that Craven designed Freddy with you in mind. And your mom. And your mom's boyfriend. I know, Keith is an asshole, but he technically still counts. I can tell there are some hard feelings there, so I'll put it another way. Wes's design choices reflected the subconscious fears of the audience and quirks of the human psyche. The colors of Freddy's sweater, for example, were chosen because of another article that Wes read, because apparently he spent a ton of time in waiting rooms, that said that red and green were the most difficult colors for the human eye to register when placed side by side. So the simple act of looking at Freddy would cause disorientation and confusion to his victims and the audience. But every horror villain needs an iconic weapon, right? Jason had his machete, Michael Myers his butcher knife, Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre had his Barrett 50 cal. But the four-taloned glove that Freddy wears on his right hand is unlike anything seen on screen before. And a fact that I find equal parts fascinating and frightening is that it was inspired by the claws of Wes's cat and the primal fear that we have of being torn apart by wild animals. Then there was the issue of the mask. Just like with the weapon, Hollywood's three most iconic killers at that time all donned some horrifying headgear, and Craven, recognizing this mandatory motif, had the ingenious idea to make Freddy's face the mask. Or rather, what remained of his face. But we can't forget about his hat. After all, it's the only thing keeping his head warm. Craven has actually got a creepy story behind this one, so I'll let you hear it from the man himself, if copyright strikes don't get in the way.
Freddy's hat was exactly the hat of a man who had scared me when I was a little kid, who I think was a drunk walking down the street. He just somehow knew I was there. And he stopped and he looked right at me and just held that. It just scared the shit out of me.
It's funny how little moments like that manage to embed themselves so deeply into the psyche of kids. I'm sure that whoever that drunk was, he didn't have any harmful intentions toward the random little kid that he happened to catch watching him walk down the street. But something about the shape and vibe of that guy clearly resonated with the young Wes. In a bad way. And while we're on the subject of childhood trauma, that is where Freddy's name comes from too. Apparently that was also the name of a bully who used to regularly beat up Wes when he was a kid. I wonder where that guy went in life. The name Krueger didn't hold as much emotional baggage for him though. Wes said that he picked it because it sounded evil and reminded him of one of the big war plants in Nazi Germany. It was also an extension of the name Krug, a character from The Last House on the Left, a movie he also wrote and directed. But as iconic as Freddy's visual design and powers are, what makes him truly terrifying are the crimes that he committed during his life. And this is where I'm probably the most at risk of getting demonetized, so in case that happens, consider dropping a like to increase the odds the algorithm shows this to your fellow horror fans. Because when Wes Craven first conceived of Freddy, he wanted the character to be as evil as possible, so he made him the worst kind of criminal imaginable.
There is only one thing worse than a rapist. Boom. A child. No.
Not only was he a child killer, he also committed crimes of a sexual nature. And that's about as explicit as I can get since we're not allowed to have grown-up conversations on YouTube. This detail ended up being scrapped in the 11th hour because it just so happened that during the film's development, accusations of similar crimes were surfacing all over California. Schools, daycares, and babysitters were accused of assaulting the children they took care of. And while many of these claims turned out to be completely baseless, it was a sensitive topic that Wes had no intention of reminding people of. Not everything was left on the cutting room floor, as Freddy does still make the occasional innuendo.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
And in the third movie, he even goes so far as to disguise himself as a hot nurse and make out with Joey a little bit. But these are still only small samples of the PDF file platter that was sent back to the kitchen.
Bon appetit, bitch.
But remember when I said that Freddy was the first of his kind? At this point, you're probably wondering what I meant by that. Or you're thinking, no, I wasn't. Did you just frame it that way so you had an excuse to circle back to that point and you couldn't think of a better way to do it? Well, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that's exactly right. It's an interesting topic though because it calls into question what kind of entity Freddy could be. And the best part is, unlike a lot of the questions that we ask in folklore, there is an actual answer, and it's found in the very first movie. This is probably gonna sound weird, but one reason I actually don't mind having nightmares is that when I wake up from them, I have a whole new appreciation for life. It's hard to put into words the relief that I feel when I realize I'm not actually gonna be eaten by a bear or have to listen to an entire Taylor Swift album. Sometimes real life can be a nightmare of its own though, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. Standing out and making a name for yourself are almost impossible in this oversaturated social media landscape. That is why I recommend our sponsor Squarespace to anyone looking to get their brand established online. Squarespace makes it so that anyone from you to your grandma can design your perfect website that is tailored to your needs. For years now, I've been talking about Squarespace's giant library of website templates and how their Fluid engine simplifies the design process by allowing you to drag and drop assets wherever you see fit. But their latest flex is design intelligence. All you gotta do is explain the kind of website that you're looking to launch and the vibe that you're going for, and Design Intelligence will generate that site completely with all the features that you need. That could be a blog to share your thoughts, a playlist for your music, a calendar so your clients can schedule appointments, or even a shelf to sell merchandise. Squarespace makes it simple and stress-free, which is why I use them for messeduporigins.com. To try Squarespace yourself, go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo to start your free trial. Then, when you realize you love it, use code Jon Solo to get 10% off your first purchase. So when Freddy Krueger shows up on Elm Street to terrorize Tina, Nancy, and the gang, Nancy uses a specific word to describe him. Twice.
Boogeyman. Boogeyman.
Boogeyman. But is that description accurate from a folklore perspective? Who, or what, is the Boogeyman? The Boogeyman, or Boogeyman as he's known in the UK, is technically defined as any figure deliberately used to frighten others, almost always children, to control their behavior. A nearly spot-on description of what Freddy does to his victims. Boogeymen are often used as ominous threats towards children. They're used to reinforce or discourage certain behaviors under threat of abduction, torture, and death. If you tell a kid, "Eat your vegetables or the Boogeyman is gonna spit roast you like a rotisserie chicken," they're probably gonna eat their vegetables. I mean, they'll probably also grow up to feel oddly anxious around vegetables without ever fully understanding why, but the point is they will eat their vegetables. And regardless of how you feel about good old vigilante justice, Freddy's attacks on the Elm Street kids are a punishment for their parents' actions, even though his crimes were objectively more evil. So he also serves a similar function as the Boogeyman. Since bogies and the Boogeyman targeted children, they are also heavily associated with lullabies, as little songs were used as warnings against them. And I don't think I have to remind you about the iconic Freddy lullaby. The bogey's physical form is also formless. They are shapeshifters and can change to whatever shape is going to terrify their victims most. like Freddy. Now, Freddy's go-to form is obviously his extra crispy look, but I don't think he has to look that way. He just chooses to as a poetic way of terrifying the Elm Street kids by showing them their parents' handiwork, even if they don't realize that's what they're seeing. The Boogeyman is not the only figure from Folklore that Freddy has got some archetypal overlap with, though. The unspoken deal that the Elm Street parents unknowingly made with him, where they got the satisfaction of revenge, but he got to continue terrorizing and killing their kids, it kinda reminds me of Rumpelstiltskin and how the Miller's daughter agreed to give him her baby if he helped her out of her jam, or how her father got her into that jam in the first place by lying about her ability to spin gold. Then, in a very different story called The Girl Without Hands, something very similar happens, where another Miller, what is it with Millers, unknowingly sells his daughter to the devil. Freddy takes a similar kind of ownership over his victims. We see them stored inside his body on more than one occasion in horrifying visual sequences that have been living rent-free in my head for the past few weeks. And then there's that famous line from the second movie.
You are all my children now.
Now, if you want to see an episode on the messed up origins of the Boogeyman, let me know in a comment, because there is a lot more to explore there. But there is still a whole other realm of Freddy's powers that I am dying to tell you about. The realm of dreams. Straight talking here only, okay? To echo what I said in the intro, Freddy was the first figure in folklore and myth to actually live in the dream world. The ancient Greeks believed in spirits that personified dreams who could invade our minds and deliver messages from the gods, but to my understanding, these spirits didn't exist in some extra dream dimension. They were the dreams, and they inhabited the same material plane as the rest of us, spending their time with Morpheus and Hypnos on their sleepy island and waiting to visit mankind at night after flying through the horned and ivory gates. In Nightmare on Elm Street, the dreamscape is its own separate space, and while Freddy may have had limitless power there, he was basically a prisoner. The only way for him to manifest in the physical world was by Nancy pulling him out of her dream, or by slowly taking over Jesse's body.
You've got the body. I've got the brain.
With that said, Freddy is far from the OG when it comes to nighttime terrors. As it turns out, sleep paralysis demons have been haunting humankind for thousands of years. For those unfamiliar with sleep paralysis, consider yourself lucky, because it sounds pretty horrifying. To put it simply, it's that moment between dreaming and waking when your body refuses to obey your brain's commands. At best, you're just laying in bed, kinda groggy and confused. But at worst, you're trapped in your own skin, eyes open, unable to scream, while an evil presence seems to lurk just outside of your view. If you want to take it back to the beginning, we can go to Mesopotamia. I expected a scene change, but I guess we don't have a Mesopotamia background. Bummer. Some of the earliest known writing about sleep paralysis came from Mesopotamia around 2400 BCE. Although they obviously didn't call it sleep paralysis. The Mesopotamians believed in a whole class of demons that terrorized people while they slept, usually by sitting on their chests so they couldn't breathe, a symptom that you're going to hear me mention a lot this section. They had some demons with proper names and specific sinister behaviors though, like Lilitu, or Lilith as she's known in Hebrew myth. Her nighttime shenanigans included using her victim to impregnate herself, kinda like a succubus, a demon from medieval Europe that also assaulted her victims while they slept. An incubus is the masculine form. As mentioned earlier, the sexual nature of Freddy's crimes would end up getting scrapped, but some PDF file undertones still made it into the final cut, so the parallels with Lilitu and the succubi are still there.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
What's wild though is that descriptions of these literally breathtaking nighttime intruders show up all over the place. From Brazil to Japan, people describe waking up in the night overwhelmed with dread and the feeling of being crushed by a heavy weight on their chest that made it impossible to breathe. Some even claim that they could see someone sitting on them. The particular form that someone takes depends on the culture. The Japanese name for this surreal state of not quite asleep but not quite awake is kanashibara, which translates to binding, and their uninvited guest is known as the makarageshi, and usually takes the shape of a small child that, in addition to sitting on you, will flip your pillow without consent or throw it at you. But that's pretty tame compared to sleep paralysis in other cultures. What I gathered from our research is that the most common form of sleep paralysis demon is a disgusting old hag. And if you're wondering why so many people are dreaming about your mother, trust me, I'm wondering the same thing. For real though, the night hag is prolific in the sleep paralysis scene, but you might know her by a different name depending on where in the world you are. In European countries like Scandinavia, Scotland, Ireland, England, she was known as the Neat Mara, which is Anglo-Saxon for night crusher, obviously referencing the crushing weight that she placed on her victims. I talked extensively about the Night Mara in my episode on A New Horse, one of the weirder inclusions in the Scary Story series that accurately depicts the experiences the Night Mara's victims described. She would enter their room in the form of mist through a crack in the walls or floorboards. She would sit on their chest to crush the air out of their lungs, and some even claimed that they were turned into horses and ridden around the countryside. Although that may have just been a dream. I think the most messed up part of the Night Mara's history, though, is that in the countries where this happened, old women were often accused of being witches, and mobs of vigilantes would get together to beat them to death, not unlike how Freddy was killed. Only he was definitely guilty of his crimes. The country of Brazil is terrorized by their own version of the Night Mara known as La Pisadeira, which comes from the Portuguese word pisar, meaning to step on or to press. As her name implies, she's also infamous for invading people's homes and sitting on their chests so they feel like they're suffocating. Then there's the Cuchamar, as she's known down in southwest Louisiana. There's not a lot that sets her apart besides her name, which is French for nightmare, so I guess it doesn't really set her apart, but just another example of this pestilence of nasty old hags that are desperate to take your breath away. They don't all come in this form though. Some variants, like Portugal's Fredinho da Mão Furada, is a masculine figure who dresses like a friar and has holes in his hands, but he does use said hands to force the air out of you, just like the witches. Over in Cambodia, the visitor is shapeless, but this sleep paralysis phenomenon is still described using the same suffocating terminology: the ghost that pushes you down. Now, Freddy Krueger is, of course, not known for this particular method of torture, but he does deflate an asthmatic girl in the 4th movie, so it's not outside of his wheelhouse. So how do we describe the impact that this overdone dream demon had on the world? And my underwear. Well, to put it simply, Freddy Krueger didn't just change horror, he revolutionized it. Before A Nightmare on Elm Street, the horror landscape was already packed with big, brooding, masked slashers who ran through more teenagers than R. Kelly. Jason, Michael Myers, Leatherface, they had a menacing but silent presence. Then along came Freddy, a killer who talked back, who made audiences laugh before making them scream, and sometimes both at the same time. Freddy turned horror inward by weaponizing your imagination. Jason and Michael hunted you through the woods, but Freddy hunted you through your own mind. He wasn't just a monster, he was you. The worst parts of yourself that you repress on a daily basis and fear the outside world finding out about. And the worst part was, because he lived in your dreams, there was nowhere to hide. You can't outrun sleep. And that core idea that evil can reach you in the safest, most private place imaginable opened up the horror genre to a whole new kind of story that creatives today are still finding new ways to expand upon and take to new heights. I think the most obvious and recent example has to be Stranger Things, specifically Vecna in Season 4. He's got so many parallels with Freddy Krueger that he basically is Freddy Krueger, without a sense of humor. Or clothes.
Like Freddy Krueger's boiler room.
Freddy Krueger?
He's a super burned up dude with razors for fingers, and he kills you in your dreams.
Dustin, seriously?
I'm guessing that's also why they cast Robert Englund as Victor Creel, although it's pretty weird to have the actor who played Freddy in a world where the Freddy Krueger movie exists. But hey, if New Nightmare did it, then I guess Stranger Things can too. Not only does Vecna's skinless appearance strongly resemble Freddy's, if Freddy were a nudist, he also targets children like Freddy, haunts them using nightmares and visions based on their personal fears and traumas, and he's even got a claw hand. Granted, the lore behind Vecna is a lot more thought through and consistent than Freddy's, since Stranger Things writers weren't flying by the seat of their pants trying to crank out the next installment as soon as possible like the filmmakers had to do in order to keep the studio's doors open. Going beyond his impact on pop culture though, Freddy tapped into something ancient, that collective cross-cultural fear of the darkness behind our eyelids. He's the boogeyman reborn for the modern world, a reminder that some things don't change, and that myth never really dies, it just evolves, and gets an increasingly uglier wardrobe. Freddy Krueger himself may be a work of fiction, but the evil that he embodies and the fear that he induces are all too real. And if you aren't ready to face the inner demons that are lurking in your nightmares, then take some advice. Whatever you do, don't go to sleep.